we've got a lot to get through on this series. Beginning in the northwestern part of the Croatian coast, Pula is somewhere that you may not have heard of. It sort of depends on your enthusiasm for travel or how many hours you've logged trawling for EasyJet flights. Me personally, if all the hours I put into the EasyJet website were flight hours, I'd be a qualified pilot by now. It's not one of the European cities that you hear come up in conversation all that often, and we're going to have a lot to cover in this series on the Croatian Adriatic, but look, you have to see this place. And I don't know, I always feel like this brings the episodes to a dead stop, but December 2018, we were in Andalusia and I was having a go at filming our first ever travel episode. If you scroll a little ways back on the channel, you'll see it. However, just 2 months previous, we'd managed to get some crazy cheap flights from Bristol Airport right at the end of the season to spend about 72 hours in, yes, Pula. And it was a great little trip, and I took a couple of thousand photos, but no video. Actually, okay, that's not quite true. I did take this video of the waves at Lost Beach. Very nice. But yes, once again, I'd started filming travel episodes, and I was kicking myself that I hadn't had the idea just a little sooner and filmed our trip to Pula. I don't know if I'm going to get hauled up for saying either Pula or Pula. Pick one, whatever. And having explored the length of the Dalmatian coast in subsequent years, it felt way past due to come back and shoot an episode there. And also including Istria. You see, while Pula has some utterly remarkable stuff, it's not a huge city, and there is a whole wealth of stuff just waiting across the whole of the Istrian peninsula. So we're going to try and fit that in as well. Okay, well, delayed flight, that was pretty much the 2022 scene. All the cool kids' flights were at least an hour taking off. Pula did look gorgeous from above at night, including the unmistakable outline of the amphitheatre, though being rather upstaged by this roundabout. Through passport in about 15 minutes and taxi to the hostel I was staying at. I just briefly stepped out on the streets to get a glimpse before turning in. Now, while the hostel was fine, I didn't actually shoot much coverage of it. There was a samba festival happening a few yards from our window. So I was awake around 7 a.m. with relative ease, having slept so shallowly. I had a bus I needed to catch at about 9, so this was just a good chance to catch the highlights, and that's as good an excuse as any to discuss what is so special about Pula. Well, low-angle flag shot. Unmistakably at the top of the list, the amphitheatre is just an uncanny survivor. If you've seen the channel, you'll know we've been around our fair share of theatres from antiquity, but the condition of the Pula amphitheatre is a near miracle, not least for a city that was bombed in World War II. I mean, in some ways, giving the history almost seems redundant. I mean, just look at the thing. It is Roman, in case that wasn't incredibly obvious. And lots of Pula's standout highlights are from its Roman legacy, including, but not limited to, the Arch of the Sergi, the Punishment of Dirce mosaic floor, the Twin Gate, and this, next to the Venetian Loggia, is among the best surviving Roman temples in Europe, small though it might be. Now, while that's a lot of Roman stuff, of course the main fabric of the town is an elegant former Venetian town with shady historic streets, the likes of which you'll see plenty of down the Adriatic coast. Now, not to cut away too quickly, but that morning I'd wanted to get in some other stops in Istria rather than just the Pula stuff, so we'll have ample opportunity to catch that in the next few days. It was on a bus and up to Porec. Here's the thing, Pula is pretty close to the triangular point of the Istrian peninsula, but as you go up the coast, you have several other beautiful coastal towns, including Rovin, give it a bit, and Porec. I was actually planning on attempting to keep my Porec trip to just 2 hours, but the bus wasn't returning for another 4. And I was somewhat glad. This gave me a bit more of an opportunity to amble around the old town without watching the clock. And it's a good thing too. The Euphrasian Basilica turned out to need like minimum 90 minutes, even if you're slightly rushing it. And in the August heat, it's entirely necessary to lose yourself in the shady web of streets. The other waypoints to see in town are a bit blink and you miss them, but there's lots of history there. And with a little time left, I opted to hit this cafe, perched at the top of a Venetian tower. Now, not to really confuse the timeline, but when you get to the Cortula episode, you'll understand why I was so keen for this. Was hoping for a good espresso vanity shot, but with the safety fence there wasn't much of a backdrop to use. So that was time up. I must say I was really enjoying the unfussy simplicity of Croat buses. They proved to be pretty straightforward to navigate, sort tickets and all the basic stuff that doesn't always work when you're trying to use an unknown bus network in another country. I'm actually a bit curious what happens when you press the hot drinks button. I assume it just cascades hot tea on your forehead. Well, circling back south, the next stop was Rovine, which essentially is the other major coastal town up from Pula that draws crowds, so this should make for an interesting comparison. Rovine is very charming straight from the off. You could easily be in one of the towns on Lake Como or Lake Garda. You go to the waterfront to get a bit of a wider angle, and you can sort of make out the peninsula, round, islandy bit that makes up the core of the old town. There's not a big selection of waypoints to here, actually. It's more of just a package deal of the town itself. Unsurprisingly, headed upwards towards the church, but missed being able to climb the tower by a factor of a few minutes. Well, darn. Still, can't be upset in a place like this. On the way down the hill, I just happened to get lucky with this find. I was in need of some coffee, and this turned out to be one of those places that really knows what they're doing. Ordered 2 espressos to compare and contrast. The Colombia had hints of tobacco, but just a little bit more acidic. The Brazil was a bit sweeter and chocolatey. I practically floated out the shop. That was some really good coffee. There's something about meeting people who put lots of effort and love and attention to the coffee they're making. It just feels really special. Home on the bus, mostly uneventful evening, just relaxing in Pula. Ended up hanging out with some of the people at the hostel, and it was really nice, just talking to strangers and swapping stories with different people from all over Europe. But I wasn't filming, so I won't expound on that further. Next morning, ended up waiting about 90 minutes for the Flix bus to show, and it was a journey that dragged rather as we wove north and across the border into Slovenia. The day kind of crawled by. Having got to the bus station for about 9 in the morning, I wasn't actually free to explore Koper until 2:30 in the afternoon. Now, while it's still in Istria and Koper is a pretty close match for cities like Pula and Rovine, this is a story that will have to wait. It's just a bit too much to fit in this episode. Definitely some nice surprises up beyond Istria. Oh, by the way, we encountered pretty severe queues on the Slovene border, but as of New Year's Day 2023, Croatia is now in the Schengen area, meaning this border snarl-up is a thing of the past. Definitely a good thing. And it means goodbye to the kuna, which I feel like I'll miss, mainly for its total lack of easy arithmetic with the sterling. But okay, time jump. We're back over the border on a bus back from Trieste into Croatian Istria on what was day 5. Had another stop off in Rovine on the way past. This time it was to stop off at Monkodonja. This is a Bronze Age hill fort with ramparts, and while I know that might not be everyone's thing, if you've been on our Twitter at all ever, you'll definitely know it is ours. The only way I could get there is by cab, but it's a unique enough site that it was more than worth it. And I had picked the hottest day to do it. The sun was absolutely beating down, but no regrets. That was brilliant. And then on the way back to Pula, dropped in on Vodnjan for just a quick look. Got that sleepy small town vibe, and while I wouldn't be inclined to spend a week there, it was definitely nice just for a couple of hours. Well, back to Pula, and despite what had already been a pretty full-on day, hit a few more filming objectives before heading to hostel number 2. So for the second chunk of time I had in Pula, I was staying in the Crazy House hostel, which, far from being remotely crazy in any sense of the word, either in its design sensibility or general vibe. I mean, I guess it's hard to sell your brand as Sensible House Hostel. Now, these ended up being some of the most special parts of the trip, and once again, portions I have no footage of because it was having the chance to meet strangers, strike up conversations, and it was genuinely really lovely. There ended up being a group of about 7 of us who just hit it off and hung out together for the evening before even going on an impromptu night out. I have just this few seconds of shaky mobile footage from the night out. The club we ended up in was not that great, but just having a night out with a group of international friends was a real treat that I hadn't anticipated. So the next morning, I was a bit slow coming around. Apart from being at the club till about 3 a.m, there was a dude in our room who snored like a satanic T-Rex. But despite the 3 a.m. bedtime, we were on the bus for 9 the next morning to go and see one of the main highlights of Istria, at least one that gets advertised most widely. Just a few kilometres north of Pula, there's a splash of islands called Brioni. Now, let me backtrack a second. This was kind of cool. So, okay, previous day, on the bus back from Trieste, a dude sits down next to me as it's one of the only seats, and we get talking. And it turns out, this is just one of those many cool kind of travel stories. This is a guy called Miguel who lives in Germany, but speaks better English than I do, and he's staying in Pula, and more serendipitously, we're going to be in the same hostel. So, after passing the bus ride, swapping life stories, we agree we should probably link up and hang out. And yeah, he was one of the guys on the night out with the other 5 or 6 of us that evening, and even though I'd penciled in Brioni for this day, it was definitely more fun with company. Now, as you can see, this wasn't the splash of bright blue that would normally accompany footage of Brioni. In fact, it was a rather gloomy day for late August, but there wasn't really another day we could do this, so we went anyway. There are boats leaving from Pula, but they're a bit of a rip, and I'm not actually sure they land as opposed to just circle the islands. So the way to do it, jump on one of the plentiful buses to Fazana, and then boat from there. Now, during the Yugoslav years, it was one of Tito's favourite residences, but there's a lot more there besides. There's the gateway of a Bronze Age hill fort, just visible in the trees. It's also got some pretty extensive Roman ruins, from a villa to a fortified settlement and even an early basilica church, all pretty impressive stuff archaeologically. By the early afternoon, the sky was tentatively blue or thereabouts, and to be honest, by about 2 o'clock, when the next return boat came around, I was certainly pretty drowsy, so headed back from Fazana and to the hostel. After a bit of a nap, and with a few hours of daylight still remaining, short bus ride later. Now, Pula has a waterfront, but it's sort of an industrial dock. It's not one you'd really want to jump in. But just a couple of miles up, Lost Beach doesn't exactly have miles of rolling sand, but it's definitely a beautiful spot. A bit of a hazard underfoot, but good excuse for a dip. And hey, courtesy Miguel, something I never normally get on the channel, some underwater footage, which sort of illuminates not only the rather strange rocky surface you can feel beneath your feet, but also that we were swimming amongst some pretty sizable jellyfish. And it was a lovely evening. We were denied the full sunset by the headland, but it didn't matter. I was having a bit of a moment of sitting on the rocks, feeling incredibly lucky to be there, and just taking in the rush of it, but with a twinge of sadness too, wondering how much longer I'll be able to travel like this. It was the last day of August 2022, and in a year when we'd been able to see an incredible amount. I mean, Palermo in Sicily to the tip of the Scottish Highlands, Troy and Ephesus in Turkey, Lake Garda in Italy, both Cyprus and North Cyprus, which you can see in the previous 2 episodes. But we're only able to do it because we keep costs like rock bottom, rarely paying more than £40 for a flight. In fact, Palermo ended up being £15 for the round trip, which I found particularly funny. And then staying in cheap accommodation, bus rides to places, just whatever the least expensive option is. But time is getting on. Where life's going, I'm worried with other commitments I might not be able to do this anymore. In some ways, I was lucky to be able to do it in the first place. I guess we'll see. Anyway, then it was another evening in, chatting with strangers at the hostel, as well as no footage. It's kind of rude to point a camera in people's faces when you've only just got talking. Had an actual night's sleep for a change, and next morning, bus to Labin. Now, this is a town you probably don't hear about as often. It's on the eastern coast of Istria, and a bit of a ways from the normal tourist routes. But apart from some mining heritage on the edge of a gorge, it's also got an old Venetian town perched way up high on a rocky promontory that I really wanted to see. It was September the 1st, the trees were loaded with conkers. Now, Croatia is transcendently beautiful, and most of all along its coastlines, but when it's all overcast and moody and all Yugoslavia, I massively freaking dig it too. The old town has a slightly shabby beauty to it, as many Croatian historic towns do. Walking the tight streets, it was a bit of a blowy day if I recall, but some great views out to the dramatic Istrian interior. I don't think this next one goes on the tally of Venetian bell towers we've climbed, as I'm not actually convinced it's old enough, but couldn't resist the call of the campanile at the top of the town. It's only 10 kuna in. Now, the manner in which you ascend these bell towers varies, but most manage some sort of metal gantry. The stairs here can best be described as alarmingly askew. In fact, the whole staircase was a red flag stitched together from other red flags. But made it to the top. Well, some pretty great views. Was mainly there for the Venetian Easter eggs, and the old town is pretty compact. So after a quick espresso and a mid-morning pizza, because, I mean, sure, it was there and it was pretty cheap, bus back. Had another place in 2018 I wanted to revisit and film. This one is a little harder to link to. The last hour-ish, you've pretty much got to take on foot if you don't have a car. But first, now, these really crack me up. There are plenty of buses in Croatia, just barely the skeleton of a train network. It's a little puzzlingly limited, and the trains, oh my goodness, they are the cutest. They tend to be just one, maybe two compartments maxed, covered in graffiti, still rocking that 1980s interior. Perfect. I have no notes. So, train to Kanfanar, and then it's on foot, on the verge of a fairly quiet road, to Divigrad, a deserted medieval town that seems like it was made just to be a movie set. In 2018, we got a bunch of extremely moody shots of it. Well, this time, I was surprised at how many cars were parked up. In 2018, we'd gone in October and it had been entirely to ourselves, but turns out in summer, yeah, I'd underestimated how popular this would be. I was having to film around or frame out a bunch of German families. How much of the ruins you wish to climb up somewhat depends on how enterprising you're feeling. It is set up for visitors. This isn't trespassing or anything, but it hasn't got info boards or guardrails, so there are a few sharp drops you could hurt yourself if you're not careful. In the last 4 years, it's actually had some work done too. There are a few areas that were fenced off last time that have been made safe. Well, walk back, train back. It was almost time up for this trip. This was the last evening. Every time I walked past this ice cream place, it had queues down the block, and considering there were ice cream places all over, that seemed odd. Well, maybe this is just a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I thought I should at least try it out. It was fine. I mean, yeah, definitely not bad. I probably wouldn't queue for another 20 minutes for it, though. So I got up early on the final day, which promised glorious sunshine, but on a trip I'd already been out almost every morning first thing. Yeah, it turned out I'd crisscrossed Pula many times in the spare moments of the past 4 days, and it meant there weren't really many places to film that I hadn't already. There were a couple of Istrian Easter eggs I would have liked to have made it to, but they were suitably far away and the transport options suitably slim to make them a huge time and effort footprint to reach. And I actually decided to do something completely out of character, and after 7 pretty hectic days, had something of a rest day, which commensurately ended up being a pretty espresso-heavy day, even by my standards. I was trying to be in the restful mindset, which turns out takes a bit of concentration. It doesn't really come naturally. I finally finished John Julius Norwich on the history of Venice while sitting by the loggia, which was pretty cool. It's an incredible read on the history of the Venetian Republic, and one of the main sources for the series that we've had in gestation for seemingly ever. Also spent a good long time just sitting by the amphitheatre. I don't want to be weird about this, but the best way I can describe it, there's just something about being in the presence of it. It's almost close to a spiritual experience. I won't take up more time with the various ways I made the 10 hours pass, with the exception of just one last attraction which I hadn't got around to yet. To be honest, I was actually back and forth if I'd go and see Zero Strasse. I didn't see it last time. It is one of the more significant Pula attractions, but I just wasn't hugely fussed. It's a bit of an odd one. It's a subterranean Austro-Hungarian network of defence tunnels. And yeah, cool. Okay, bus to the airport, dramatic skies, all very emotion. And then, oh, what do you know? For context, as I hinted at the beginning of the episode, far from the first time this year, there's another tale from 2022 which we haven't relayed yet, which was slightly more dire, but I'll explain that in the future. So the departure lounge turned into this refugee camp as our flight was a casual 6 hours later than planned. I mean, I hope you're all aware of this, but more than a 3-hour delay to your flight anywhere in European airspace, and it triggers a payment of €250 or £220 sterling straight off. So that pretty much paid for most of the trip. Anyway, eventually we all got on the plane and back home, so yeah, that's the main thing. With that, it's time for concluding thoughts. Whoever is running tourism in Istria, I mean, take a freaking bow, because the way they present the various attractions, from the information available to the general way, you just get mad hyped about Istria, even if it's just the small things. It's not like towering mountains or vast beaches. Look, it's all just very well done. As I mentioned, there's big chunks of this week where I have no footage because it was spent in the company of strangers who became like the closest friends in a matter of hours. And even with all the amazing things we saw on this trip that are flashing up on the screen now, staying at the hostels and the people we got to meet are some of the best parts of the whole thing. I guess maybe the real friends we made along the way were the friends we made along the... No, wait, hang on. So that's Pula and Istria, but we're heading further down the Croatian Adriatic, and next episode we're in Zadar and Šibenik. If you'd follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and if you'd subscribe and hit the bell and do all those things here, that would be a massive help. But if you've enjoyed the music you've been hearing in the background, that's ours. We create all the music for these episodes. You can find it all on bandcamp.com, and if you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, we'll catch you on the next one.